I don't know whether I will be doing justice because the oeuvre of literature, if you see this, it's quite complex and it's really a very rigorous task to do. So in the beginning, uh, ask for a bit of understanding. If I have not done justice, please bear with me. And Anantaji and Minati and Randhir and the team, thank you so much. So I understand I have half an hour to speak, so I've jotted down some points, so I will go through them. Um Margaret Chatterjee was a well-known scholar with a passion for philosophy and born in London on 13 September 1925 to Edith Hickman and Norman Gunzer. Margaret went to Parkstone Grammar School. On leaving the school, she went to Somerville College, Oxford in 1943 to study philosophy, politics, and economics. There she met uh, there she met Nripendranath Chatterjee, a professor of English in India, whom she married in 1946. This is from Paxton, 2019-30. She died in 2019. She taught in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Delhi from 1956 to 1990. Margaret, known for her intellectual thought, sought to explore specific frameworks that could explain the complexities of a particular thought process and its impact on social, political, and cultural consciousness. So, this is my emphasis, that how she sought to explore certain specific frameworks. Chatterjee's well crafted arguments compel one to think how deeply she had reflected on various issues, not just to express some views, but to suggest a powerful interpretation for considering an issue. Reflecting on Gandhi as one of the foundational figures of Indian independence movement, Margaret Chatterjee has sought in her book Gandhi's Religious Thought, a critical philosophy that subverts any pretension of compartmentalizing issues. Quote, Gandhi never looked at social, political, economic, and religious issues as if they were in watertight compartments. He saw them as complicated fabric, spun by millions, to use the idiom of spinning and weaving, which he loved so much, unquote. Margaret, as a skilled teacher, appears to suggest through such observations how one has to through his or her devotion and commitment can set up high standards that is inclusive and that would be characteristic of a person. Being acquainted with the Indian tradition, it perhaps became a conviction of the potential for her in realizing how the secular understanding could be a part of an important role, both at the philosophical and mundane level, which she finds inspiring in Gandhi. As she says, quote, Gandhi was throughout his life concerned with very secular goals. First, early in his career, the securing of civil rights for Indian settlers in South Africa and back in his own country from 1915 onwards, the gaining of national independence for India, unquote. In her assessment of Indian thought, Chatterjee shows the trajectory of intellectual development. She says, strictly speaking, Indian traditional thought, diversified as it is, contains neither philosophy of religion nor technology as these are commonly understood. Hinduism is not a creedal in form that concerns patterns of living, including rituals and other practices. For example, those involved in certain seasonal festivals which are not wholly ritualistic. At the same time, a man can be a Hindu even if he does not follow any particular one of the practices that other Hindus may follow. So, religious thought is a phrase that has some justification in the Indian context for it can cover both the complex structures of consciousness and their behavioral manifestations. Related to the above, related to this view, Chatterjee's paper on concept of dharma, which signifies her understanding of the term dharma, which mentions that, quote, the concept of dharma is one of the most challenging in Indian philosophical thought. It seems to cut across so many conceptual distinctions, legal, social, moral, religious, that to those attaching importance to come to grip with the friction of fact and meaning, institution and the ideal, the ethical religious concepts of a traditional hierarchical society understandably concern themselves in large part with relations of values and institutions rather than with personality, unquote. Furthermore, the traditional society sought to facilitate the developments of communities of people in an integrated manner and thus needed to sustain their overall growth, which they believed was the raison d'etre of their value system. People believed that pursuing a value oriented life would eliminate ungodly principles from their lives and bring prosperity. Early Indian thinking was frankly this worldly and concerned with practical matters having to do with the pursuit of prosperity. Meditative philosophic thought added what has been called the Atman-centric predicament. Related to this issue uh, was the practice of adhering to the principles of karma, which aim to positively configure the self-image that encompasses life in an integrated manner. Therefore, the message of the epic literature might well be taken to be like this. No matter how sincere the efforts, quote, may be to do the best in the circumstances, there's a momentum in events and the destiny that shapes our ends and leaves behind much that is disastrous. It is in order to set up a kind of protective barrier against this that the ancient Hindus laid stress on equilibrium in society, unquote. However, at a later stage and with much advanced level of thinking involving complex issues, no doubt, and the radical questioning and self-searching held full sway in a different context, that of metaphysical thought. At the everyday level, fact and evaluation remain bound together in Hindu ethical thinking through appreciation of the components of situation and circumstances. There appears to be a specific context that provides personal approach to a political issue, which Chatterjee closely observes to find a probable solution to a given situation. For instance, in her book Gandhi and His Jewish Friends, she explains how Gandhi's appeal attached friends and others to join him in participating in the cause he loved during the independence movement. She observes, quote, his relations with Jewish friends and associates spanned decades of his life and were concentrated in London, South Africa, and back to India, Ahmedabad and Bombay. The question immediately arises why he should have been attracted to them and vice versa. There is also the consideration taken from later in his life that Gandhi believed that only those personally concerned with a particular issue should concern themselves with it. The specific context in which this view of his expressed was the Sikh offer to open communal kitchens for the satyagrahis, unquote. Gandhi's approach was very human. He had a genius for entering into close relationships with all kinds and conditions of men and women, becoming lifelong friends with some and finding enough in common with many others to be able to enlist them in the causes to which he devoted himself. So it is necessary to note here that for Gandhi, developing a support base was imperative in the context of the then current Indian situation, which was deemed irrational by the colonial administration. It was necessary to share with his friends the absurd colonial interpretations of the Indian independence movement. This approach can find a resonance in James Cohen's views, which he says that whites feel that the blacks should want to be proximity with the whites, as if being close to white people enhances the humanity of blacks, unquote. Further elaborating on this, he says that Jesus enters humans to take sides with the oppressed. Through Christ, the poor man is offered freedom to rebel against that which makes him other than humans. Chatterjee's Interlands and Horizons discusses the ever evolving power equation in detail. It is essential that we reframe our understanding of power imbalance, which has caused suffering to countless beings. The sense of supremacy that is ingrained in the power equation needs to be confronted repeatedly. To counter this, an ideology that seeks a larger space to define the self is necessary. This would foster a broader potential political consciousness, promoting harmony and further facilitating a vision of peace. Would religion help? To ask whether or not religion can serve uh, as a key to amity, either between those of different faiths and communities or within the fold of a single faith, in a sense, to ask an improper question. Religion on its own is not something that can work either for or against amity, because it is not to be found divorced from social, economic, and political factors in the day to day commerce between persons. It's a strand in very complex fiber. Those who interact with each other do so from a variety of motives and in a variety of contexts. The growth of political consciousness would identify why people, in terms of religious affiliation, statistical surveys apart, can be both misleading and even boundary building. When Spinoza admired the city of Amsterdam and its civility, is a quote from Chatterjee, with which commercial affairs were conducted there, he noted that among fellow citizens, religion and sects are considered of no importance. Having been associated with the Indian culture and society for long, Chatterjee's observations regarding it are very significant. As she points out, quote, anthropologists and political scientists seeking to locate civil society in India are most likely to find it in the institution of caste. This may come as a surprise to those who make the caste system a whipping boy in their analysis of politics in India. Caste communities, anthropologists have pointed out the flattening of caste hierarchies, and there are certain parts of country where the higher castes are the most indigent ones. Castes, in fact, show us elasticity they tend not to be given credit for, unquote. In this context, it is important to note that those who are dominated in the power game can also make their positions meaningful through their situations, which might appear weird and ultimately affect the results of elections of political parties. Power struggles inevitably involve. Hello. Power struggles inevitably involve climbing over those who have less clout. Religious and regional diversities cut across caste distinctions as one would expect, and this is complicated by the fact that the caste is present in some form or the other in minority communities as well. Unquote. Abandoning one's identity as a mere individual, and one has to identify with the community to go towards change. It seems significant that the theoretical discourse of communitarianism, which has surfaced in recent years, for the most part, has had its origin in the United States. This is in large part reflects an ongoing critique of federal power and a nostalgic recall of original pioneering communities with their face-to-face togetherness. There are historical reasons for the enormous success of voluntary associations in the United States, and along with this, the impressive range of avenues for the expression of public opinion. Pointing to the significance of this standpoint, Chatterjee says how contextual this is. Terms like caste reflect this context too. And she explains, quote, the thrust of those remarks has not been to defend caste, but to point out its peculiarity vis-a-vis civil society, economy, and state. Historically, caste began as an economic principle analogous to the guild system of the Middle Ages, developed into a dominant mode of social stratification, and after Indian independence in certain parts of the country became an important tool for mobilizing vote banks. Outside legislatures, it features in various organs of state functioning. In other words, caste has come to assume a political role. Unquote. She argues that power sharing ultimately became irrelevant, thereby affecting the lives of ordinary people. Explaining this, she mentions, quote, anyone studying in the three variables of civil society, community, and person around the globe will be struck by the difference between the situation in the United States, former one party states, and the so called two-thirds world. There are, of course, countries which do not fit into such threefold classification. Unquote. It is not a question of show reckoning in the US that is being suggested by her perspective in this context, but how the range of non inclusive approach that has always played an important game, and also how this kind of historical experiences put into perspective demonstrates an effective foreclosure to democratic principles. It serves a crucial purpose to expose the hidden intentions and strategies behind the hegemonist action, particularly those aimed at keeping those it considers an obstacle to advancing its agenda. How does one analyze the trauma that emerges from exclusivity? Is this trauma a collective one or is this intersubjective? Perhaps we may deliberate on her discussion of intersubjectivity in her book, Life, Worlds, and Ethics Studies in Several Keys Indian Philosophical Studies, which brings in interesting observations for serious reflection. She says, quote, the problem of intersubjectivity is in some way is of the epistemologist's devising. This may sound like an imposition. However, she explains, further saying, as far as philosophy is concerned, I think that Kant's difficulty over relating the transcendental, empirical, and nominal has not yet been overcome, nor has the problem arising from the Hegelian legacy, that of relating history, been overcome. Relating history as such to personal histories being solved either, unquote. Searching at articulations of intersubjectivity, Chatterjee probes into theoretical character, commenting on the complex trajectory, saying at about the same time that Husserl developed some of Kant's ideas in a phenomenological direction, Hermann Cohen was drawing on the Kantian insight that the relation between man and man was essentially moral rather than an epistemic one. Cohen takes into account Kant's thinking on the concept of humankind, which he echoed in his own discussion of uh, Menschlichkeit and humanity. Plumbing, moreover, in his work out of religion of reason, the rich Judaic sources that deal with the concept of otherness, mending relations with others is made of vehicle of mending relations with God, as he says. In this context, it is interesting to observe how Chatterjee's journey is provocative as she brings the philosophical thought process of Jewish and other thinkers to analyze the issue of intersubjectivity. And she says, quote, the problem of intersubjectivity in some ways of epistemologists devising, for if knowledge is seen in terms of relation between subject and object, and there are many subjects, the question as to how subjects are related to each other immediately poses itself. So the very term subject, outside grammar and politics, is a philosophical one. In ordinary life, we speak of people or persons and not of subjects. Unquote. The concept of alienation is related to this context invariably and referred to by many others in varied ways. Chatterjee's philosophical sensibility, which follows her book Philosophical Inquiries, indicates the nature of contemporary treatments of problems chosen. The philosophy of the West, especially, cannot be properly understood without some knowledge of the background of which that philosophy grew. For example, in studying Locke's stand in the controversy concerning innate ideas, it is helpful to bear in mind that Locke was a staunch advocate of freedom in non philosophical fields as well. unquote, Chatterjee. Her scrutiny, Chatterjee's scrutiny in the context of philosophical inquiry marks a significant step when she points out, excuse me, how Karl Popper asked a class of physics students to observe and write about the same. However, he was in turn questioned by them who wanted to know what they should observe. It is necessary to have a problem and to a quote, it is necessary to have a problem and to make a hypothesis about your problem before you are in a position to say what observations are relevant to the solution. What exactly is meant by relevant in this context is not easy to pin down. To assume that some things are relevant to a particular investigation presupposes the principle of isolation of systems. So, commenting on the topic of philosophy and science, she feels that it is utterly crucial to note that when we compare philosophy and science, there is nothing in the history of philosophy comparable to the growth of the experimental method, which we found to be dominant in the history of science. But this seems to be not altogether convincing, as Chatterjee looked back to point out that there have been philosophers like Hume who have done their best to introduce the experimental method of reasoning into philosophy, as a priorism is itself encompasses many possible approaches, as we can as can be seen by comparing Descartes and Hegel. Margaret's critical thinking should should be appreciated when it points out that when compared to science, a kind of bias towards philosophy is prevalent since long. In this context, she says that some contemporary philosophers deriving from Wittgenstein think that the philosopher's business should be with description, and what they usually mean by this is that philosophers should describe or analyze the various uses of language. Philosophers are preoccupied as ever with the general question of methodology, even today. In contrast, when the scientist is concerned with method, it's a question of what particular procedure to adopt within a general framework of ultimate appeal to the verdict of a controlled observation, an appeal the propriety of which he takes for granted. A very significant point brought home by Chatterjee regarding verification related to philosophical issues is that some parameters are apt to some disciplines. Any attempt to standardize it may not be appropriate to understand other issues in other disciplines. For instance, she says, one thing we discovered about science was its intimate connection with mathematics. Now, rationalist philosophers have shared the conviction that the method of demonstration, which belongs but peculiarly to geometry, is something that would also be fruitful for the philosopher, and that its utilization would make philosophy scientific. However, on the other hand, there are branches of philosophy such as ethics, aesthetics, and epistemology, which have no relation to mathematics. It is mathematics that has given science its precision of language, but philosophical language cannot but have such precision. In modalities of otherness, Margaret writes regarding in context of alienation, discussing the stories of Doris Lessing. Margaret feels that her narrative is deeply introspective and intensely sensitive to enormous rifts in contemporary society. It's not only a heart-searching treatment for this, but also witnesses to a further gulf. It shows that there cannot be reasons for snapping out of indifference. And what difference does kind-heartedness make to such a sea of misery? It is, however, just the despair, but also search for the conditions that interrogate trauma, because an interrogation is also like the mitigation of traumatic situation. So Margaret's concern, however, is critiquing the root cause of traumatic alienation while searching for alternatives in the wake of violence emerging from alienation. Violence that has been brought about in many ways affects existence itself, and Margaret, conscious of it, expresses her concern at all times. In a provocative turn, her comments on Kant's enthusiasm regarding the French Revolution are interesting. She says, quote, the French Revolution about which Kant enthused at times, was followed by terror. Tilthe provides a delightful fable about the arrival of Kant in the Elysian fields, or wherever departed spirits gather, and where he sees two groups gathered round Plato and Aristotle, respectively. Where would he choose to sit? Everyone was eager to watch what he could choose. Without hesitation at all, Kant chooses to sit near Plato. This fable has some point, no doubt. Her book, The Rimless World, explores her experiences in various fields through an exchange of imaginary letters. It's a collection of verses that perceive the world as a critic and traveler. The poems include highly condensed short works that take flight from an image, as well as longer ones that explore a wide ranging transcendence of frontiers. This is evidenced most of all in the title poem, uh, which is the key to the rest. Rather than resorting to mere theoretical style, Chatterjee has taken an insightful journey in this book, enriched by her experiences. This reminds us of Edward Glisson's remarks, which resonate with this when he refers to the concrete and diverse realm of lived experiences. In her poem Cactus, she says, which reads like this: the cactus puts up 1,000 defenses. You touch at your peril once a year. This one explodes in dazzling whiteness. Such beauty cannot tarry, but I have already learnt not only beauty, but some moments of closeness, bloom, and cannot linger. Unquote. She appears to believe that truth exists in human consciousness, therefore, when it gets articulated through poetry, it demonstrates an unswerving fidelity to the expression of the poet. Hence, it is important to note that ethics in such a view entails not the creation of a world, but the unfolding of a truth in some way, transcended to a given situation, or even the gradual modification of this world, such that this suffering then that the poet has to some degree made our own experiences, and she, so she gestures towards this fine transformation. Our anthology on contemporary Indian philosophy has been designed to present a selection of discussions by contemporary Indian philosophers on problems of current philosophical concern. However, the task of editing the critical oeuvre in this context has been very challenging for her because, she quotes, it has not aimed at providing mere accounts of any of the traditional systems of Indian thought. At the same time, unlike in the case of compiling volumes on contemporary philosophical thinking in other countries, an editor concerned with Indian philosophy is confronted by the fact that there is a tremendous corpus of classical writing that constitutes India's philosophical heritage, is something to which, say, the relation of an American thinker to the pragmatist movement, or of a British thinker to the empiricist tradition, or a German thinker to Kant and Hegel, scarcely offers a parallel. So, when engaging with contemporary philosophy, an author must consider the geopolitical and market interests of the present day world. However, the thought process of earlier and contemporary times often refer to the principle of universal humanism, while emphatically raising questions regarding existing social orders beside other issues. Beingness or individuality has always been a significant subject in both early and later philosophy. On the concept of being or individual, Richard Desmet makes an interesting observation in his essay Towards an Indian View of Person, where he says the uncertain status of the notion of person in India is conditioned by the fact that it is foreign to the Sanskrit tradition and has no adequate rendering in any of the Sanskrit languages. When dealing with man or deity, Indian philosophy always worked with other concepts which rarely imported the holistic signification of person, unquote. Therefore, uh, there are there the another interesting essay The claim of mathematics to be considered as knowledge has been raised by Dayakrishna because it has always, quote, problems for philosophers with empiricist conviction that ontological status be granted only to that which is which is encountered in sense experience. To accept it as knowledge is inevitable to raise a question: knowledge of what? It's difficult to accept that it is knowledge of that which is encountered in sense experience, as this is not only rob it of the element of universality and necessity, which has been the reason for its perennial fascination for the rationalist philosophers in the West, but also make the whole field of tragic mathematics impossible in principle, says Dayakrishna. This position is made more interesting by the suggestion by D.T. Deshpande in his article, Are There Sensations? He says the word sensation has for long been part of common currency of psychology and philosophy, both of which inform us that our knowledge of the external world is derived ultimately from our sensations. However, it is to be fair that neither psychologists nor philosophers are entirely clear about the meaning of the word. Chatterjee's ability to sustain multi-level debates is a very distinct skill that enables different interpretations to explore insights. So one cannot help but be impressed to see how Chatterjee is exploring the yet another area which is very interesting, the area of music related to time consciousness. In her essay, she makes it clear, saying that the task I have set myself, quote, is the examination of certain problems concerning time in music from a phenomenological standpoint. Husserl's treatment of time carries on from that of Hume and Kant in the sense that, like them, he sees that our awareness is not merely successive. There is something in the very structure of consciousness which enables us to go beyond the moment, to stretch the span of the now. Without this, there would be for us no such thing as unity, identity, and continuity of perceptual objects, unquote. This is not an afterthought. It suggests that distinctness is necessary to understand a phenomenon that cannot be viewed through a conventional mode of perception. Sometimes the identity of the is overshadowed by alienation, as pointed out by other scholars. However, our experience suggests that what we see is shaped by the lens of time. Kant was concerned with demonstrating how our temporal consciousness contributes to the constitution of the real world. The problem of reality doesn't arise for Husserl in that the phenomenological methods itself explicitly excludes this consideration. He agrees with Kant in treating temporality in terms of structure of our consciousness and insists on the importance of relation in perception. He goes on to specify that temporality is in common the form for not only perception but for fantasy, imagination, memory, recollection as well. So consciousness becomes a critical framework to reflect on the impact of the image, using also the musical tool to comprehend these specificities. Margaret Chatterjee's explorations have not only been interesting but also highlighted her sense of solidarity with those who have struggled to achieve their goals, despite the situation when it is difficult to ignore the cogency of logic. One is reminded of Marx's view that the ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas, that is, the class which is the ruling material force of society, is at the same time the ruling intellectual force. What emerges from Chatterjee's writing is that the many philosophical and other quests which had taken her on a long journey, she must have surely enjoyed. She believed that appreciating thoughts from various cultures, people, and destinations certainly enriched her mission. I stop here, Ananta. Thank you much. Hello. Hello, Ananta. I completed.
Thank you, Meera ma'am. I think Ananta bhai is not. Ananta bhai, can you hear? Please, you can. Hello.
Ananta must be sleeping.
So we can take this conversation or this discussion further. Sorry, Meera ma'am, I was actually, I joined a bit late. I missed that, I think, the first part of the presentation. Actually, I forgot today, Saturday. Normally, it comes on Sunday, so I forgot.
No problem, no problem. I
So,
know. Just
sorry. So now,
let me see you.
now,
Anyway, I don't see you, so let me see you in this at least.
yeah, you see me. Now you can see me here.
Yeah.
I-
So how is
so
everything?
now,
Ah,
yeah, everything is fine.
you're
So
wearing
today I
specs.
just forgot.
Oh, you are wearing
This
specs
is a bit.
also. Yeah.
No, this reading, no reading. I just need to focus. No, like
It's looking
reading. It is.
nice. It's looking good. Looking very nice.
Thank
Yeah.
you, thank you,
Uh,
thank you. For
Ananta
reading,
must
I
be
need it.
sleeping.
Okay.
I told Ananta they will make it in the morning, otherwise we'll be sleeping. Yeah.
This- So now we can invite Mr. Afan to share some of your reflections and on Ma'am's presentation. Mr. Afan, please.
So, good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
So, yeah, I mean, for a person who was introduced to Miss Chatterjee's work, it was quite intense. Like, the qua- like a brief about I think you went through all her works, like most of her works, like a brief explanation,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
was it was quite a bit intense. But I mean, it was like the
I know.
way.
That to the time is night, 9 o'clock, more than 9 o'clock. So all the more. Yeah,
Yes.
I
So
know.
it's like you discussed about consciousness, power dynamics, subject subject and object, and and also like you included a lot of philosophers as well. So it was like not so relatable to me, at least. Like I tried to look ma'am's work online, but even that I could not find much. So yeah, that was
Uh-huh.
my this thing. Like I mean, it was like quite a lot of dense concepts that were put together. So
Yes, I know
yeah,
because yeah, because I told Ananta that the oeuvre of this literature, her literature is I didn't I took some of her books, not all of her books. So if I take all of her books, it will be going to be much more complex and detailed. But what I found is that because that is why I try to emphasize on the to explain that the complexities of a particular thought process and its impact, wherever whatever subject or whatever area she has taken, she has tried to put it in a particular framework and its socio-political cultural consciousness. And that
okay,
is, yeah, so that is what, well, since there are a lot many books, I mean, it is even for me it is very odd, a bit bizarre, because if it is one or two works, we discussed many of the characteristics in details.
yes,
But since Ananta said that I should try to give as many works as possible, because at that time Ananta is a friend from a long
mhm,
time, so I even fight with him. So I said I cannot do so much, but it is going to be very complex if I
mhm.
take all these. So I understand your problem, which is my problem too. So if I do not do a proper kind of a detailed discussions of one or two books only, I also feel very uncomfortable. It's understandable, and thank you for very honestly saying that. You are a teacher there in Pondicherry School, college.
No, ma'am. I'm an independent researcher. I'm a social scientist,
Okay.
and I'm an entrepreneur.
Ah,
So I'm
ach-
setting up a sustainable development consultancy. But
in
I can
Pondicherry? In
no, I
Pondicherry?
mean not in Pondicherry, but I have a registered business in Sweden. I'm setting up operations in India.
Wow. Because we are doing a project on sustainable development. I was in the women's movement for more than 40 years. and we are connected with women's works, etc. So I would love to know more of what kind of sustainable projects
So,
that you will have. If you,
so,
my
so,
this thing is that, yeah, you can send me the email and then I can talk to you on that. Yes,
okay, ma'am. I can get your mail ID and I'll share it with you as
yeah,
well. But I mean, I can understand like today's presentation. I mean, it's the nature of consciousness itself is so complicated. I mean,
yeah.
it's not complicated. It's not easy to put it in words, actually.
It's a different points of view from the, like if you see Kant, Immanuel Kant, deals and
Mm-hmm.
gives a perspective. Hume gives another perspective. Gandhi gives another, because from the Indian context and of the Upanishads and the Vedanta philosophy. So you have different perspectives, and we can't say this is good, that is bad, because they are different ones. That's all. So
They are
yeah,
all different perspectives of looking at and understanding
yeah, yes,
consciousness.
yes. And Chatterjee has tried to trace that trajectory as to how these have given, and if it is, for example, possible to have a contrast, like for example, science and philosophy. She said. So she said there is a parameter. The science is okay if you have the mathematical precision, then that. But that is not all the time with with philosophy. This doesn't happen. There's a philosopher called Wittgenstein who was saying that that through language you will be able to, but that also doesn't happen. It's not always that through
Mhm.
language, or the language is the basis for understanding. So if you say, well, how are you fine, no, that doesn't make any sense. So that is a nonsensical value, etc. I mean, in a very slang language, I'm not supposed to put in such non-philosophical language, but just to communicate to you. But
Mhm.
that is not the way that Indian this thing, because for them language, it is a very important component. And we have language philosophy. Bhartrihari's language philosophy is very
Mhm.
well known. So there are different standpoints to see the phenomenon of consciousness in it. The phenomenological schools see it in a different way. So it's
Mhm.
interesting. But if we discuss so many books, then it becomes very odd, what you said, and it's perfectly all right what you said. I am so I was so uncomfortable. I told him let us have only one or two. He said no, it is an introductory lecture. So in the
Uh-huh.
beginning you can just introduce all the bits. So I just introduced all the
Yes.
thing.
And
Thank you.
also, like when people who discuss consciousness, I think it's like they do not only look at it from one perspective, like they look at it from like different perspectives, from
Yeah,
an individual, from a community scale, from a national scale,
yeah,
from the global scale. So it's like only then one can understand, like put together like the whole
yeah.
concept of this thing.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. In Ananta's letter, my mail address is given, so you can send me about this sustainable development issue there.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So Minati, is it okay? All right.
Yeah, now Anantavai has joined, so I invite Anantavai to
Oh,
just
he
now
has
to say
joined.
something.